Hey there, internets. So, recording this late at night. Probably have it go live in the morning or midday for Thursday. But right now, Congress is debating increasing the debt limit. I'll be honest with you, sometimes I think it's kind of silly, but if nothing else, once you've passed a budget, you got to pay the bills. But you being able to say, hey, you just need to slow down, as a check and balance, I kind of get it. Because everyone's saying, did the Republicans win? Did the Democrats win? Did anyone win? I don't know if anyone won on this one, honestly. Links are going to be in the description below. I started out with a bunch. I may include a couple of news articles, but the two most important, and I would open them right now, are a link to the text of the bill, which is 99 pages, and another link to a Congressional Budget Office projected economic and budget projection dated February of 2023. Of course, that was when it was released, so it was put together later, or earlier, excuse me. But there's some tables in here that really kind of make why this bill is still a pile. It's a bare step in the right direction, I will say that. But ultimately, there's a lot of work to do if we want to get this thing turned around. It does not appear that the Congressional Budget Office report accounts for the fact that when the IOUs to Social Security and Medicare run out, the benefits have to match no more than the projected revenues, and that's important. That's probably the one saving grace right now of, since nobody did anything, people believe that Democratic lie about Republicans trying to steal Granny's Social Security, that Barack Obama and John Kerry and Al Gore and Hillary Clinton all peddled. Joe Biden and every other Democrat peddled that lie. And when every Republican plan was no changes if you were retired or nearing retirement, and yet they peddled that lie and people believed them. And it's a provable lie. But that's kind of it seems like a side issue to the immediate thing. So it's kind of going through that thing. I did read all 99 pages. The dipwad, and yes, he's a Republican, but he's still a dipwad, who said they didn't have time to read it. I'm sorry, but if I can work a day job and find time to read it over a couple of evenings, if I just sat down and done nothing else, I could have read the entire thing in an evening. You're full of it. You're lazy or stupid, one of the two. But just taking a step back from this, like I said, it's still a pile. As it stands now, the deficit is almost as much in discretionary spending, and almost enough that even if you eliminated everything you didn't like in their entirety, like if you think we shouldn't have as high a defense budget, but you eliminated the entire defense budget, you still couldn't close the deficit. If you think defense spending is why we have a deficit, you are wrong. In that same Congressional Budget Office report, for those of you Democrats out there who keep crying that it's tax cuts, it is not. If you go clear back to 1973, when you look at where it says outlays and revenues in this report, you can actually see that we have averaged, since 1970, 17.4%. If you go even further back in some other materials I've seen, 17.6% of GDP since 1940, with some of those outlier years where we got down to like 14% of GDP in revenues being in years where we had the 90% tax rate that you guys all seem to think we need to have. And ultimately, we are spending about 24% of GDP. According to their projections in February, federal outlays would total 6.2 trillion or 23.7% of GDP. We are projected to take in 2023 18.3% of GDP. And we've never ever gotten over 20.5, and that was 1 year. So what makes any knuckleheads out there think that you're going to get 25% of GDP to balance the budget and then begin paying down the debt? I don't know what world you are living in, unless you expect to claim everything that everybody makes, which maybe that's your goal. So it's a pile still. But when you go through get into this, the most important tables without having to read the whole thing are table 1.1, which is revenue in billions of dollars, not as a percentage of GDP. I think that's a important way to look at this, because when you say percentage of GDP, it gets a little bit abstract, unless you're trying to talk about years down across time to try to show that there's, how much do we actually spend in proportion. When you're talking actual dollars and cents, I think that how much in billions it actually is. Mandatory spending is broken down in table 1.4, and it includes a lot of things beyond Social Security and Medicare. It includes things that are kind of on autopilot, like unemployment insurance, CHIP, the Children's Health Insurance Program, veterans benefits, SNAP, which I did not realize we were spending $120 billion on food stamps. I got something to say about that a little bit later, which makes one of the things that Republicans got more important, probably a little more direct to the budget than I initially listed it in my notes here. Discretionary spending is in table 1.5, so I'm kind of skipping over tables 1.2, 1, and 1.3 because a lot of those are more specific to the amount of debt and the amount of spending and outlays as a percentage of GDP, which, again, too abstract in this discussion, I think. What you see in mandatory spending is driving the budget growth, though, particularly Social Security and Medicare. All the others are pretty flat. And if you look at those, they are already paying out more than they're taking in payroll taxes. Payroll taxes is the dedicated revenue stream. Once the IRUs run out, Social Security and Medicare cannot spend more than they take in. So 2033, checks get cut. Might want to plan on that. If you're my age, don't plan on Social Security even being there. But largely, this bill could make a dent in bringing the deficit in line because you limit the spending on the discretionary side. That will affect the amount in interest we pay a little bit. It's going to make a dent if I understand the numbers correctly in the projections. 400 to 500 billion off the previously projected 2.1 trillion-ish deficit. Now, there is a discrepancy between the text of the bill for budgetary authority and what the Congressional Budget Office was projecting, and that won't be on there. But when I looked through and just to give myself a consistency of what numbers we're using, I went back through and calculated their projections versus a 1% to arrive at that 4 to 500 billion number off of what it would do, because discretionary spending is limited to 1% growth per year. And if you look at how that would affect discretionary spending when it's growing at 3 to 6% per year, depending on the year projected, because they're using baseline numbers. If they could stick to this and their targets, that's what it could do, which would roughly be a 20 to about a 20% cut in the deficit come 2033. It's not enough. That's why this is a pile. So, win or lose, one thing we have to ask is, what were people negotiating from? Because anytime you go into negotiations, you have to ask for more than you think you're going to get. If Democrats thought they were going to get a clean bill and they asked for a clean bill, they are terrible negotiators. Republicans won. If they went in saying, we're going to ask for a clean bill, but we know we're going to give up some stuff and this is how much we're going to give up, and I don't know what was going on in their mind, it was a draw at best. The GOP wanted $130-ish billion in spending reductions, returning spending to 2022 levels. Where's my outlays list here? Table 1. I gotta scroll down a bit to 1.4. Returning that to, so yeah, it would have been about 100, and they were looking to cut spending to about 100 by about $100 billion or so, depending on what numbers you're using. They were asking for that. They were wanting to eliminate all of the IRS funds, eliminating legislatively the loan forgiveness, which does affect the ultimate debt and the interest we're paying on it, and only raise the debt ceiling $1.5 trillion. That's about a $400 billion charge that the rest of us, in some way, shape, or form, are going to be saddled with if the Supreme Court does not eliminate it. They did get, okay, so that was what they were added to, and you gotta remember, we have divided government. So not everybody's going to get everything they want. No matter how much you say we should get everything you want, at some point, you're going to have to give. Because whatever you pass through the Republican House, even if all the Republicans vote for it, you have to get through the Senate, you have to get past the White House. The time there's no excuse for spending like crazy was like when we had the trifecta and Mitch McConnell called some of Trump's cuts to keep spending lower in his first budget. He called it barbaric. That's why McConnell needs to be primaried. So, what did anybody get? Well, the Democrats did get the debt limit suspended rather than just a hard dollar value increase to January 1, 2025, which means it won't come up again next year. But it may as well have been a $4 trillion increase. What did the GOP get that was directly budget related? They clawed back some unspent COVID funds as the emergency has passed. That's about $30 billion. Repeal of $2 billion of the extra IRS money, and I guess that will carry out down the line. Discretionary spending is flat for next year. That is a step in the right direction. It actually needs to go down. Discretionary spending goes up roughly 1%. So using the Congressional Budget Office's projections, you're talking $16 to $17 billion increase in discretionary spending. All their targets, either for in the legislation, is 1% increase, and that's where, if you compare that to the Congressional Budget Office projections, even just going off of what's current with their numbers, and you just calculate it out, you get to that a $400 to $500 billion less spending come 2023. And repayment of student loans will resume in August. There is some things they did that were not directly budget related. Increased requirements for food stamps. They wanted higher. More people have to work. Democrats pushed back, but they got some. I'm sorry, but he who does not plant should not eat. Simple as that. Why should I have to work 40, 50, 60 hours a week? I said this in a short couple days ago. Why should I have to work for everything I get, my food, housing, and medical care? You know, they have programs for that are on this mandatory automatic pilot for spending, and somebody getting those programs not have to work. How is that fair? How is it right? And quite frankly, when you read that whole dry CBO report, and I did, one of the economic challenges is reduction in labor force participation. So if people are perfectly capable of working, they should be working, not just collecting food stamps. End of story. Why are homeless people allowed to collect SNAP benefits and not be able to work? Those are the people that should need the job the most. Others who are exempt is veterans and foster kids aging out. And I kind of get the veteran one, totally get. I kind of get the foster kids aging out, only because, there is that transition point in life as you go from your parents' house out to your own, or should. There's a point there where you're an adult, but you're living at your parents' house. You're an adult, you got another job, if you're not going to school, or you're maybe doing both, and then you move out on your own. We all go through that. Foster kids don't necessarily have a place where they're entitled to be there, because of course, are you really entitled to stay there once you're an adult with your family? Usually they will help you. Hopefully they will. And this was not something that is directly budget related. It does state as a purpose that part of the purpose of the programs is to move people off of the public assistance. And then they got expedited energy project approval, which is supposed to have one agency as a lead agency. When you read it, a energy proposal should only have one agency that you have to deal with, and everybody else just gives their input to that agency, and some time limits for how fast they have to move. And then it specifically orders the government to approve anything related to the Mountain Valley Pipeline in West Virginia, very specifically. Probably a good thing, probably not necessary, because those kind of things may improve economic growth, even if you don't have to. And of course, the CBO already projects that taxes increase because of the Trump tax cuts expiring. That probably won't happen, so who knows what's going to happen in that regard. So who won? Well, if Democrats thought they were going to get everything they wanted, which was a clean bill, they didn't win on that. Most Americans were perfectly good with cuts as part of this. I think they're starting to sense there's a problem, because eventually these bills are going to come due. You're going to have to pay the interest on that debt. You're going to have to pay for all this stuff, and something's going to have to give. We could have fixed some of these problems years before, but everybody wanted to protect their own programs, have their own wasteful spending. It's like there's a Hill article I may link to, talks about some things that they could easily cut just by getting rid of earmarks. $26 billion. A big earmark, I don't know if it's in this article, I don't remember because I read several in the last few days, brought up that one earmark in the defense budget was for a second engine that would only fit one version of the F-35, but some congressman, it'd be developed in his district, so he had to push for it. Military says they don't need it, but they're going to spend $6 billion on it. $6 billion that could either go to less spending, or if you have to leave it in there and spend it, you could be spending it much better for the military. And always having this, and that's not and saying, well, it's always going to be that way, is not an excuse. So that's how it came out. If it's a win for Republicans, it's barely a win. If I can't see it as a win for Democrats ultimately, because they did not get a clean bill. Ultimately, what the Democrats would have loved to have is just eliminate the whole idea of a debt limit. because they just want to spend and spend and spend and spend. In the realistic terms, as much as I would like to have seen about $200 billion in actual cuts just to start it with, there, you got it. What can you get through? And that's kind of what checks me, is what can get through also the Senate and the White House, and who's going to get to the blame if something doesn't get signed. And I will totally grant, a friend of mine sent me an article where someone said, look, the Democrats refused to even engage for 2 or 3 months. And that is a very fair point. They tried to just say, we're not doing anything until they were held to the fire. And if that's what finally got them to yield anything, I guess it's a win for Republicans. But it's not much of one. It's kind of like you won by, they, in the 9th inning, hit by a pitch, advanced you had a runner get across because he was pushed across when bases were loaded and hit by a pitch. That's about the kind of win it is. It's barely, and not even that dramatic. So you decide, is that a win or not? I think it barely is. I do not think, as one person, the people in the Freedom Caucus are on, the budget hawks are coming both ways. Ted Cruz is saying Democrats got 4 trillion things, and somebody else was saying, oh, we rolled the Democrats. I don't think you rolled them. If you rolled them, you'd have actual spending cuts. And ultimately, none of it matters unless they do something about the mandatory spending and cutting that back, because that is driving the deficit. Sorry if you don't want to believe that, but open up that budget and look at those projections and where the money's coming from, where the money's going, and you will see that is where the growth is. And that's just the way it is. So until then, like, share, subscribe. Hopefully this was of some value. And until then, you all take care.